society and leaving them with nothing but suffrage, pain and isolation. America's darkest secret is exposed and abrogates all basic human rights, free choice and free will for unjust slavery, reducing people to the equivalent of stolen cattle. This unconscionable practice permits human experimentation, torture and torment far beyond any legal allowance. Our democracy has literally fallen and been replaced with totalitarian dictators from the CIA, DARPA and the U.S. military. Most Americans don't realize it yet, but exposure is inevitable and the cost may be too much to bear for a nation already on the brink of collapse. We predict this as being the straw that breaks the camel's back and unleashes a massive backlash against the U.S. government worldwide, sparking protests, million-man marches and possibly war. Wireless and remote mind control technologies have existed for many years, no microchip required, and they're being used on the U.S. population right now. This isn't a movie, it isn't fiction or just a scary bedtime story. This nightmare is real and a clear and present danger to our way of life. The U.S. government has become the world's most prolific and effective serial killer ever known, and it doesn't discriminate as it systematically eliminates American citizens every day.
What is the Matrix? Control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world, built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
The U.S. government as a whole has collectively participated in the largest genocide in world history, far exceeding the total sum of life lost in every war combined in the ethnic cleansing programs of Mao, Stalin and Hitler. This includes millions of American citizens over the past 30 years directly and indirectly by use of microwaves for surveillance, as mind control apparatuses and as weapons. The FBI and DOJ are the public concealment and enforcement arms, using plausible deniability and malicious prosecution to quell dissent and justify this use as necessary to reduce domestic terrorism events, but in fact the opposite is true. The DoD and U.S. military turn a blind eye both on these illegal surveillance methods like remote neural monitoring blanketed across the nation, the known health issues of ionizing radiation and domestic gentrifications programs in use of voice of God-style PSYOPs weapons on civilians while they focus the same PSYOPs weapons abroad. The CIA and DARPA host this slow-kill civilian gentrification program and real-life version of the Matrix. It is the perpetual extension of MK Ultra on steroids. All U.S. government agencies and public officials are enamored by the fallacy of an ongoing war on terror, broadening surveillance capabilities for national security purposes, but little do they realize they are killing more innocent civilians in significant numbers, not saving them. Modern-day slavery does in fact exist within America, contrary to the abolition of slavery in 1865, and it's disguised in plain view. Many are dying today right in front of the so-called watchful eye of Uncle Sam.
Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world?
The Matrix is a neural prison taking remote neural monitoring to a morbid level reminiscent of World II's Operation Paperclip and Dr. Death's inhumane experimentation upon Jews and innocent civilians. In truth, these ungodly human experiments are still happening today upon a significant demographic of U.S. citizens identified as targeted individuals and gang-stalked victims. The U.S. government's targeting program is without a doubt a genocide in progress, yet concealed as a national security benefit. Although the NSA's remote neural monitoring version is capable of surveilling your every thought, emotion, location, viewing what the target sees, accessing visual memory and recording it all. The CIA, DARPA and the military's version can do all the above plus the additives of manipulating your emotional and mental state, injecting images, videos, changing memories, dream modification, communications loops and visual cortex inductions, biofield modification, and insert the victims into a virtual prison they cannot escape. All intended and designed to destroy the victim in every respect in order to fracture their psyche and reprogram, groom, condition and brainwash the victim to serve a pre-designed purpose. The Matrix is the equivalent of hell on earth forced upon each victim without consent, legal authority or any sense of morality. It deprives us of every civil liberty we have and amounts to international war crimes violating the Nuremberg Code. The inflicted torture, torment, pain, suffering and psychological duress upon the victim has not been seen since the Holocaust and hides in plain view while the public, law enforcement and medical professionals stigmatize the victims as mentally ill. It is in fact modern-day slavery for victims amongst the most heinous form of inhumane, non-consensual human experimentation ever conceived and infringed upon man.
What is the Matrix? The Matrix is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
Victims are broken into shadows of their former selves and conditioned to commit suicide, act out violence upon others, or suffer in agony until they die of cancer, strokes, heart attacks, blood clots, or neurologic diseases. By design, it produces nothing but misery, devastation, and removes every dignity from each victim it is imposed upon without obvious logical reason or legal authority, as the truth is much more sinister and diabolical. This all happens within a so-called democracy and is generally imposed upon the poor, handicapped, outcasts of society, lower income, uneducated, or those seen as not being able to fight back from all backgrounds. They are tricked into believing they are playing the hyper-theory game, told they are the one earning some great power, hunting aliens, speaking to gods, angels, or demons, trying out for special forces, trying out for the FBI or CIA, or told it's a neighbor, family member, friend, the cartel, a biker gang, or street thug perpetuating this upon them. The U.S. government ensnares children, adults, and the elderly, all victimized, groomed, suppressed, made to be compliant, conditioned, and brainwashed with nefarious intent to harvest their resources or use them as pawns at some point in the future. Victims are isolated from family, friends, loved ones, their financial situation is destroyed, their living stability removed, and even then they are victim shamed, adding insult to injury without the courtesy or bravery of at least putting them out of their misery. Everything they've earned is stripped from them and never replaced, as they are led on endless goose chances back, filled with endless excuses as to why the torment never ends. Every insecurity they have is exploited, every misdeed extorted, every emotion chastised, and every simple pleasure denied is logged into the weaponized RNM software profile as a trigger so any operator can sit down at the HMI touchscreen and work over the victim. The U.S. government has essentially waged war upon U.S. citizens.
Something else makes the same kind of noise.
War.
It was always suggested that World War III would be a psychological war, but who would have believed our own government would incite this type of warfare upon ourselves? Victims are abused, used up, erased, disregarded like trash, left behind and forgotten by the very government sworn to protect and serve them. This is all funded by taxpayers and has been exposed by two prior administrations. The CIA and DARPA have escaped justice up until this point based upon a failure to simply reflect on past atrocious programs yielding the same effects, which is absolute criminal neglect on behalf of law enforcement, the Department of Justice, and the intelligence agencies. The invisible nature of this hideous weapon of mass destruction ripples through our nation and the world, leaving nothing but devastation and ash in its wake. A hive mind collective is forced upon the victims with a BBI or brain-to-brain interface to IBM D-Wave quantum servers, and with groups of other victims unknown to them, whom are all harvested like human cattle for one reason or another. Some are CHS or confidential human sources, either allegiant or non-consenting slave laborers, and used as the equivalent as human intel cell towers. The CIA and DARPA collect this intel and dispense it downward to the FBI, ATF, DIA, and DOJ. This is also another verified form of slavery, as the victims have not agreement, incentive, medical release, protection, or compensation, and are often used as bait and placed in harm's way. RNM enforcers or RODs maintain a slave-like order within the regional neural network clusters across the United States, reinforcing relentless mental, physical, and emotional abuse without reprieve, nor can the victims escape this technically ensnaring neurological weapon. Communication loops and visual inductions of 2D holograms repress the victims mentally and emotionally.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
Varying microwave types induce physical torture and pain as the victims are wirelessly fused together in adversarial network architectures, types also known as one-on-many. Think of the victims as being constantly ganged up on, significantly outnumbered, lacking in defense training, knowledge of technology, tactics, methods, and stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple teams of rods work to manipulate and break down the victim to conform to their nefarious will. The electronic brain link system wirelessly link victims together like a chain gang of false imprisoned victims without the necessity of a microchip implant within the victim, and utilizing their neural signature and DNA's bioresonance frequency like a fingerprint. Human capital elements are extracted to the benefit of output of the neural network, including cerebral processing abilities or human intelligence substitutions for lack of true artificial intelligence, creative problem-solving thought processing stolen from victims, their ideas, inventions and intellectual property amounting to U.S. government-sponsored espionage, critical thinking skills substituting the lack of biologic talent within the U.S. government willing to participate so they instead enslave and steal it from innocent civilians, life experience, knowledge, visual memories, sensory abilities are all harvested, extracted, erased and replaced with a blank slate to cover up evidence and disregard the vessel. This includes removal of personal, childhood and family memories for reprogramming as an emotionless cyborg for the United States government forced into this re-education enslavement program. The stolen data and enslaved resources are stored within database to train deep convolutional neural networks to further evolve artificial intelligence, predictive modeling and to transfer to other human minds without consent, release, compensation or benefit to the victim. The victim's neural synapses is copied and their brain is mapped and a virtual clone is created in their likeness, then injected within a virtual construct with other victims called the matrix or neural prison without free choice, due process, warrant, indictment, conviction, sentencing or appeal. The victim then perceives this entrapment mentally and visualizes projected holograms streamed through their visual cortex. The victim's cells are infused with infrared to excite and exhaust them to a point of extreme weakness. This process allows for the creation of phonons or photons which are harvested from the DNA structure of the victim to benefit another human host on the output of the neural network. Energy can also be extracted or harvested from the victim and transferred to a machine or human host, as many patents prove. The average human produces 79,000 kilojoules.
At the molecular level, the human body is made up of a bunch of atoms. Atoms are made up of charged subatomic particles known as protons, which are positively charged, neutrons, which are neutral, and electrons, which are negatively charged. Sometimes atoms as a whole are negatively charged or positively charged. These charged atoms are also known as ions. When two oppositely charged ions come near each other, they will be attracted to one another like a magnet and unify, so that they can be neutrally charged once again. During such bonds, there naturally will be an exchange of negatively charged electrons from both sides in order to create a better balance. Protons don't really move because they're very hardcore and attached to the neutron. The exchange of these electrons to create balance actually creates energy. As you might recall, cells have membranes which can control the flow of elements in and outside the cell through tiny gates. Our bodies are made up of all sorts of elements like sodium, potassium, calcium, and so on. These elements are also charged ions. Resting cells have an internal negative charge, usually made up of potassium, while the outside environment around a cell is full of positive elements like sodium. When the cell membrane gates open, the negative elements are attracted out of the cell and the positive ones are attracted in. This process creates an electrical impulse. That electrical impulse can release signals to nearby cells to have them also open up their cell membranes, which can create a chain, relaying messages from our brain to our body and back. This is basically how our entire body moves and communicates. It's how our muscles move and create kinetic energy. It's what makes all of our organs and various systems function the way they do.
One is the presence of our biofield, which is 80% of your immune system, and every human emanates as an electromagnetic resonance or field naturally. This biofield can be degraded, extracted, harvested or manipulated remotely at great detriment to the victim and benefit the output host or enforcer operators. Victims experience this as microtouch or gravity, tactile feeling as electric shocks or nerve pains. If the harmonious magnetic resonance is degraded, extracted or harvested, the victim becomes sick and benefit is provided to the output of a slave neural network. Outputs physically benefit in having a stronger biofield or harmonious magnetic resonance than without the slave batteries. Mentally, the output benefit from other human capital elements mentioned prior, making them highly cognitive while slaves suffer.
While a brain is only 2% of a person's body weight, it actually accounts for 20% of the body's energy use. The brain is an incredibly complicated organ that has an immense amount of computing power. It's able to operate at around 1 exaflop or a billion calculations per second. The latest supercomputers need 1 million processors that come even close to modeling a human brain. And these computers are massive. They also consume huge amounts of power, give off massive amounts of heat. Human brains are the most power-efficient computers that we have ever seen, and most likely because of physical limitations, it's going to stay like that for a very long time. And even though semiconductor technology continues to grow and decrease in size, leading to a reduction in computer size, we're actually starting to get close to the limits of how small we can build these chips and semiconductors. And that's because the pathway that our electrical signals are traveling through on these chips are already measured at the subatomic level. Any pathway that's smaller would actually cause a phenomenon called quantum tunneling. And as we all learned from Avengers Endgame, anything quantum usually means unpredictable results and randomness. In this way, if pathways on semiconductors experience quantum tunneling, this means that the electrical signal could jump to another pathway randomly, which of course would create problems with information. There is research into other types of semiconductors, like optical ones that use light and lasers to send info, but it seems like it will be a very long time before we can catch up to the processing power of a brain. And maybe there are physical limitations to synthetic materials. In the realm of science fiction, we oftentimes make the mistake of thinking that our infinite wisdom can surpass nature. But sometimes what Mama gives us is best. And as we can tell in the machine world, most of the robot beings we see are not sentient, aside from the Source and Agent Smith. There are very few artificial general intelligences in the Matrix, and the ones that we do see generally create massive networks by sucking up other machines or other programs. Which means even in the Matrix there are limits in computing power, which limits how many true AI there can be. And although I'm sure they have several supercomputers lying around, the human brain is probably still the most efficient computer in town.
These technologies and use of victims as human batteries slaves adversely affects their nervous system, limbic system and endocrine system, all on a cellular and on the atomic level. Which amounts to a death warrant for which millions have and continue to perish unjustly. The benefits to neural network outputs and detriment to the input has been well documented and proven scientifically regardless of architecture. We will soon release the specific U.S. government officials, American royalty and engines we've identified at Langley that utilize these benefits by disadvantaging American citizens and placing them in great harm, extracting their human capital like parasites draining a host victim. The most heinous uses of the Matrix program is the act of neural soul snaring and worse, synthetic possession, in which a broken victim made into a blank slate consciously and subconsciously can be literally driven or controlled by rods in U.S. comm centers. They can be reprogrammed as a Manchurian candidate to fulfill false flag domestic terrorist acts, as we have previously well documented, or have another's human consciousness transferred that overwrites their own and takes synthetic possession of the victim's stolen body as a vessel. Many disturbing non-consensual human experiments are happening right now, literally brainwashing and transferring the consciousness and will of one human being to another in pursuit of control and the ability to live forever. The technology already exists with varied methods and has already happened regardless of your belief. The CIA has accomplished this on children, adults, the elderly, the comatose, unconscious and brain dead. The Matrix and ventriloquist programs are a staging process. When referencing neural soul snaring, the ESAs and rods can literally map portions of the victim's brain and effectuate motor functions of limbs, thought process and mental state all remotely. For example, the team could move your arm, leg, eyes and inject thoughts all real time. The CIA utilizes machines called neural inducers that serve multiple purposes. We recently back-traced former CIA Director Haspel using this very machine and utilizing President Biden's hologram and possibly his neural signature for some purpose or another. We don't believe this use or representation to be a good thing, as anyone can see that the president is troubled cognitively without question. With these neural inducer machines can isolate a specific neural signature. It can also be used to inject into larger groups as a silent observer or known hologram avatar within virtual construct to influence the group with little trace or attribution. They are also used for memory searches in waking or deep states of consciousness like REM sleep to extract information or steal extrasensory perceptions. Victims often describe being used or misrepresented while sleeping. Neural signatures can also be soul-snared and abused by fracturing or infusing the neural signature into multiple EBLS simultaneously, causing excessive radiation exposure exceeding the non-ionizing threshold, expediting cellular decay and inflicting significant cognitive load upon a victim more capable and those adamantly against submission to a Nazi occult. Forced conformity is demanded by the Matrix brainwashing playbook. Synthetic possession entails the body, mind and soul being essentially blanked out and a neural inducer being used to control that person without a team of rods and ventures into the experiment, requiring virtual lobotomies of the victim, rendering them virtually brain dead without a driver. This isn't as mystical as you may thinking upon understanding the baseline technology, MK Ultra's history and current technological advancement and capabilities since the 1950s. The matrix and perpetual extension of MK Ultra explains why millions of Americans and tens of millions of innocents around the world have been unjustly led to commit suicide, kill others, die from disease, complained of torture, torment, been misdiagnosed with a psychological disorder, placed on medication or fallen into substance abuse and been forgotten by society. The easy route for society is to continue to negate this epic plague upon us all as it has for 30 years. You see the aftermath on just about every street corner in every state in the Union. When this finally becomes evident to the mass populations that millions of Americans were needlessly tortured, killed and brainwashed to create violence, commit suicide or died in misery, who do you believe they will blame? The answers is the U.S. government as a whole will be blamed, every elected, non-elected, appointed leader and employee. They will be blamed for failing to recognize, stop and prevent this senseless genocide, as will the world blame them as well. The Revolutionary War was waged to separate us from a dictator, and it seems our democracy has morphed into communism. The Civil War was waged to eradicate slavery, and it seems we've confirmed yet another slavery ring operating in the United States, sponsored by the U.S. government, just in a highly technical way. Freedom is the birthright of every American, yet it is being stolen by the few in charge of highly complex psyops programs and pillaging the most vulnerable in plain view. Innocents are literally being abducted, raped, tortured, tormented, brainwashed and executed. Truth, like water, always find a way to surface, and history will not forget the willful criminal conduct and negligence of the U.S. government, not only by Americans but the world. As disappointing as this is to admit, the United States will be remembered as the new Nazi Germany for centuries to follow, and the time marker was set 30 years ago. Every U.S. official, employee, contractor, operators and Allegiant community stalkers involved in the use of these neuro-weapons upon U.S. citizens are terrorists upon humanity and guilty of treason. The statute of limitations does not expire for premeditated murder, and may justice come swiftly, as the innocent suffer and are dying right now from U.S. government tyrants, as the so-called honorable and valiant with our investigative, intelligence agencies and armed forces sit back and do nothing but rationalize excuses. No longer can we accept silence, justifications that they didn't know or understand. We must label them as they are in truth, which is complicit in the largest conspiracy to cover up a genocide in world history.